Okay. My name is Sarah Taylor, and I've been teaching for a little more than 20 years. I've always taught in rural schools in the Eastern Sierra. And the school that I teach at right now is Lee Vining High School, and it varies in size based on the population from as small as 25 students in 4 grades to as big as 65, just because when you have such a small population, you can have a really big class or a really small class. So the story I wanted to tell is that when I first started teaching a long time ago in '94, I had this class of 11th grade students who had prided themselves in being the most difficult class. From first grade on, they told me that they had made every teacher cry. And so my goal immediately became, I'm going to survive my first year without crying. And I did. I succeeded. And it wasn't until probably my, 16th year of teaching that I cried in my class for the first time. And what happened is every year I do an assignment with my incoming 9th graders called the mini memoir. And I made it up when I was a student teacher, and it still works, so I haven't let it go. It's one assignment I still love to do. And it just gives me an opportunity to get to know my students, find out a little bit about their stories and their experience, and also see their writing skills and teach them a little bit about using imagery and figurative language in their own writing. And as I help them brainstorm, I tell stories from my own life so they can get to know a little bit about me. Because I figure if I'm going to be learning all these things about them, and some of the stories are really personal, I should share a little bit about myself. But I always tell these lighthearted, sort of quirky things about being nerdy and things like that. The first assignment I have them do is a childhood memory. And we read some stories from House on Mango Street, which are small memories, and we analyze that, and then we kind of go back and forth with them, writing short pieces. And the first one is a childhood memory, and we do lots of brainstorming. I tell stories about dropping my cat off the roof of our house and different things like that. And then they get started and they write some for homework. And the next day in class, I always go around, and it's a really good opportunity to get to know kids, and I read over their shoulders and I laugh if they're being funny, or sometimes they'll write about big struggles or things that are sad. And I think I've never been so caught off guard as when I was coming around the class, and a student that I'm going to call Rika, I had known, it's a small town, so I'd known her father had died a few years ago, but I was totally unprepared to look at her piece of writing where she not only described her father's death, but the moment walking out into the living room and seeing his dead body on the floor. And her writing was so raw and so cathartic, and I just I couldn't stop reading and I couldn't stop crying. I fully lost it. And this is the first week of school, and all these kids are looking at me like, who is this basket case of a teacher? And I was like, what? I had to pull myself away, and I just sort of looked up, and I'm like, you should read Rika's story. It's really powerful. And then I kind of got the class back together, but it wasn't until later that at that moment I realized I had that class. They knew that I was a real person in the real world, that I had shown them some of my vulnerability. And the relationship that I developed with that student, lasted 4 years. And, when I had to file the CPS report and drive her to the neighboring town for some counseling, when she struggled with self-confidence, all her 4 years, I was a confidant for her. But also all the other kids in the class saw me as a real person in that way. And it wasn't until later that I realized, I do, not intentionally, but make myself vulnerable to my students. And that actually matters in a profound way. To develop that relationship where they're willing to take risks for me, right? And so I also think that stories matter in deep ways as well, and that if we ask students, as English teachers, we ask students to read all sorts of things and engage fully. And I think finding that place where the stories that we read in class overlap with the stories that we live is a powerful.
So that brings the relevance into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to make stories really matter. If the issues that characters are dealing with in a piece of literature are real to students with the issues they're living in their lives, they will react and engage in a much deeper way. Okay. Okay, so my second one is about, this actually happened just this year in my 9th grade class. And I had a student who I'm going to call Bobby, who's in the resource program, and he tested at reading at the 3rd grade level. And, you know, I always take my students as they come, and I kind of wanted to see what they can do in the regular classroom and adapt as we go. And because I have the advantage of having extremely small classes, I can have a lot of flexibility. And so we were reading a story. We started on the first day of school, and he came back the next day and said he hadn't done his homework, that he had read, they were supposed to read and annotate the story, and he said, oh, I just read the course outline. And I was a little worried because I was like, oh man, you know, it's like this transition to high school, like all of his learning disabilities exaggerated, like he was super confused. And then read a story the next week, and he forgot his book at home. And I was like, okay, you know, what am I gonna do? And then I got a little note from his dad that just basically said, Bobby, that's what I'm gonna call him. Bobby was embarrassed that he felt like he couldn't keep up with the reading, but he didn't want to say anything to me because he felt stupid. And, you know, obviously I was worried, right? You know, I didn't want him to feel that way. And so I wrote, and his dad, you know, you could see him struggling, single father, struggling to help his son. And in this letter, he told me, like, the advice he was giving him, that, like, he should trace the lines with his finger as he read, and, you know, some things like that. And so I typed up a response with some strategies. I often ask my students to read with Post-its. As they read, you know, if you have a textbook, they can't write in it, but they can put their reactions, their opinions, their questions, what they think is important as they read. And so I'd written that thing up, and then I went and talked to Bobby, and, you know, directly, and he confessed to me that those excuses he had given me were just cover-ups, that he actually had read. He had tried to do his homework each of those nights, but he was terrified to take the reading quiz because he was sure that he would fail it. And so I said, you know, you don't have to get it 100%. You just want to show me that you've read, that you've tried, and, you know, use this strategy with the Post-its. And he agreed that he would try, and he took that paper home that I had written up for his dad. And he must have read that so meticulously, because he came into school the next day. We had read a Ray Bradbury story called The Sound of Thunder. And every page of that story was covered with like 20 Post-its on every one. And he came in and he's like, look, Miss Taylor, I annotated like you asked. And we took the reading quiz. He got a perfect score. He and only one other student in the class got all the subtle nuances of the story about the references to the title that come up several places in the book. And he was so proud of himself, so proud of himself. And he still reads everything with Post-its. And in fact, you know, all my students do. We take notes with Post-its, they read with Post-its. And, you know, that is a strategy that really worked for him. And so he may test at reading at the 3rd grade level, because I think he has a lot of anxiety, but he can read at the 9th grade level. Yeah, fully engaged. He's the kind of kid that in some classes, totally checked out. But he likes English.